how to control one of these with one of these, or one of these, or one of these. Now, if you're one of the tens of thousands of eager flight simmers out there who are equipped with a reasonably priced joystick, then I imagine it's one of those models that's got a reasonably strong spring action to return the stick to the center at all times. Now, by itself that is just fine. It's just not super ideal for flying helicopters. However, we can make it work. So in this video, I'm going to look at some sensitivity settings, some button assignments, and put our helicopter skills to action on one of my old sticks. So let's fly. And I have brought us to spectacular Liceu de Gel in Catalonia for this one. Yet more spectacular Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 scenery for us to admire from this Robinson R66. Alright, let's have a look at what we're going to do with the controls in this one. Alright, welcome aboard, and let's just go straight up to the controls up here. Controls, right. So, I am today using this Thrustmaster TCA Airbus Sidestick Edition. Now, it occurs to me there are thousands of these out there in the world, and you may very well have one of these, or a stick kind of like it, in that same budget range, and you might want to use it to get better at helicopters. So here's what I have done to get this working kind of okay for me. Alright, so first let's look at the hardware settings for this stick, and here we go. I'm currently into this extremity dead zone style. Now I'll just reset this back to 0, and this is what the cyclic would look like if there were just a flat curve here. Now, some people might like to do it this way with reducing the sensitivity curves, but with a reasonably heavily sprung joystick like this, I have to use quite a bit of force, and watch this when I let go. Bagoing! It really springs back, okay? This, to me, given that I've come from a non-centering old Microsoft Sidewinder Force Feedback 2 stick, this is quite a heavily sprung stick for my personal taste. I'd love it if I could change these down to a lighter spring. I'm not sure if that's really an option in this stick, and I'm not going to get into joystick surgery for this video. I'll just keep it simple. So some people will go for this lighter sensitivity, but it just means that for small movements, you're going to have to use really quite a lot of this heavily sprung stick. And look, for me, my arm gets tired, which is why I think the extremity dead zone method is good. So we put this into positive territory. I'm trying it at 0.4. If that's too sensitive for you, try maybe 0.6 or 0.5. I'm just going to go with 0.4 today here on the x-axis, and that means that I get direct results from pushing only a small amount of cyclic. And that seems to work well for a heavily sprung stick like this. Your mileage might vary. If you've got a different opinion on this, I'd love to know. Remember, you need to put this in both axes, so extremity dead zone of 0.4 in both. And what I've got here on the... I'll show you this very common problem in these Thrustmaster TCA sticks. Yes, there it is right there. Notice that when I move any other motion at all on my stick, the Z-axis, which is the twist axis, like that, is got these ghost or flickering inputs coming out of the or outputs coming out of the stick. Now, I guarantee you don't want anything like that going into your helicopter controls, okay? So I could open up this stick and do a little bit of organizing of wires or cleaning, and maybe I'm going to fix this problem. There are other videos on that online. For me today, I am just going to put the extremity dead zone all the way to -1, and so that is going to have no effect on my helicopter. Alright, I can just safely forget about that. Slider. So we want this inverted. I think it's like this by default when you plug this into MSFS 2024. It's inverted. That's good. Oh, there it goes on the helicopter in the background. That's fine. So I'm actually going to be doing the collective on this tiny slider down here. It's going to be an interesting experience. So that's the main curves for our Thrustmaster stick here, or other budget sticks like it. Other things that I think are important are the trim controls. I'll put up a list at the end, but the things that I think are important are to have on this button here, I've put quick trim, and I'll give you a demonstration of that in flight. On this button over here, the big red autopilot release button, I've put rotor trim reset. On the big trigger, I just keep that for things like VATSIM and using it in the V-pilot to turn on the radio. There's a tiny button above it as well. That one there, I use that for cockpit external view mode. That's a toggle. So those are the buttons here. And on the hat switch here, it's rather unintuitively labeled, but I have decrease rotor longitudinal trim going up, down, increase rotor longitudinal trim, going down, left, decrease rotor lateral trim, and then right, increase rotor lateral trim. Very confusing titles, but it does work. All right, so we'll give you a demonstration of that in flight. I think those are important. You might have to delete some of the default assignments for that to work nicely for you. I think that, I can't quite remember now, but it had something like you had to do the rotor trim, you had to hold down one of these buttons over here to access the rotor trim on the hat switch. That's just not practical. Like if I'm holding the stick here, I need that trim under my thumb there. I don't need to be trying to work out how I'm going to do that with a button down here. It doesn't work. So I have chosen to remove that assignment and just get it directly onto the hat switch here. Just bear in mind that that sometimes can cause a conflict if you like using external views or panning around your cockpit. You don't want that going into the trim as well. So you might need to delete some other assignments. That your mileage will vary depending on what stick you're using. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Well, let's see what it's like with the Thrustmaster stick, and I'm going to have my left hand on this tiny slider to operate my collective control. You can see it moving up and down on the controller down there, and I'm going to have my feet on my rudder pedals, my anti-torque pedals. So if you do not have a nice set of pedals like me, you are going to probably have to use the twist axis on the stick, but it's just going to be very hard if you're starting out in helicopters. I recommend, initially at least, you have the tail rotor assist on inside MSFS 2024. I've got everything turned off, but please, no shame in using the assist as you're developing your skills, okay? So, me, as I said, I'm going to use those rudder pedals. So, this is a Robinson RS66. The rotor is anti-clockwise, which means that on pickup, the nose is going to want to turn to the right, so I will need left anti-torque pedal in to counteract that effect, and a small amount of left cyclic so that I cancel out the translational tendency to the right as a result of that rotor system. So, hand on the tiny slider, and let's try a bit of a hover taxi here. So we're coming up on the slider now. Let's see if I can pick up into a hover. We're going to see what the helicopter wants to do. It's starting to get light now. Slow down. Okay. Not too bad. Getting high, so I'm trying to millimeter it down, half a millimeter. And then up again. So, yeah, that's the sound of me concentrating. So, we're just sliding backwards again. Wonder if I'm just doing too much. I'm going to try and just relax on the controls. Add a bit of collective. Reduce a bit of collective. Gosh, it's hard to balance on that slider, but you can do it. So with a bit of indecisive forwards and backwards there, I think we've stabilized into a hover. It's good practice. To do that, every flight should start and end with a stable hover. Alright, let's just try this taxi out then. Let's just taxi forwards here. So I initiate the forward motion with a bit of forward cyclic here and let the helicopter do the rest. I'm not doing anything right now, I'm just letting the helicopter move forward of its own accord, having had that input put into it. Now using the pedal to come around here. Being aware that applying torque in a direction away from the rotor will result in a reduction in lift, and therefore the helicopter sags down there a bit. When you add torque in one direction, it takes away torque from another. That's all about balance in the helicopter. So I'm making very small corrections on the collective as I do this. Yeah, now I've overdone it. 0.5 millimeter is too much sometimes. Right, let's come back around here. This is okay. I think I'm doing all right after that slightly wobbly initial attempt at a hover. Okay. Oh, my hand's getting tired already. I'm not using any trim while we do this hovering. That's something we're going to do on the flight once we get going. So I'm going to come and get us positioned on the runway. There's no traffic today. Don't need to worry about that. Although I do need to worry about staying in a straight line. Okay, not too bad. Don't pick up too much speed. Nose up. Let that speed come off. Pedal to get us into the runway heading. Collective now raising to cancel out that reduction in height there. Let's just try and settle down here on the line. Reduction of collective again. And there we go. Down onto both skids. Good. And reduce the rest of the collective. Okay. Departure briefing. Very simple. We're going to do a right-hand traffic pattern. And what are we at? Our field elevation is about 3,600. So I don't really need to be exceeding 4,700 as we do our right-hand circuit. I'm going to make it a long one to show you a few of the trim features. What you can do when we fly the circuit is keep an eye up here on the input viewer. When I apply trim, it will look like that. The little cross there shows us the current trim being applied. And I can remove trim or reset trim with the button that I demonstrated earlier, and that goes there. So that'll be a nose down trim there and resetting it back into there. When we're taking off and approaching, we want to have no trim applied because we need to be feeling the real helicopter without trim at that moment, so we can be a bit more decisive in what we're doing with the controls. Okay, so the departure, we will get into a stable hover. We will pitch the nose down. Because of ground effect, we're not going to hit the ground, and when we pass through 10 or 15 knots, we're going to start getting effective translational lift, which will translate into more speed, more lift. I'll be keeping the nose down until we get to about 60 or 50 or 60 knots on here, and we'll try and climb out at 60 knots. And the other thing we need to keep an eye on is the power here. I am allowed to use up to 100% torque on takeoff for 5 minutes. Otherwise, our maximum continuous power at the top of the green arc there is 83% in the RS-66. So I'll probably keep it at about 83. Ready to go. Good stuff. Now, I was reaching for my throttle. That was incorrect. Well, do the collective here. All right, here we go. Raising the collective now. Get that left pedal ready. Get that left cyclic ready. Raising the collective. I wanted to move forward, so slightly back on the stick. That's a better pickup than the first one, isn't it? It's much better. Good. Well, let's go. Pitching down. I'll get us up to that 83% torque I just mentioned as I nose down. Nose down. Gathering speed. Through effective translational lift, and we really start to pick up speed now. Got a little bit more torque up my sleeve there to get up to 83%. More, please. More, more, more. Good. There we go. Keep that nose down until we get to 60 knots, which is now. Now I'm going to let the nose come up and we'll maintain 60 knots. It's a good climb speed in the R66. Look at that scenery. Lovely. All right, so keep that 60 knots in by pitching down to maintain 60. Now notice how far forward I've got the stick. That's a long way forward and my arm's going to get tired. So what can we do? We can apply trim so that I don't need to apply all of this pressure against the stick and the springs in the stick. So I'm going to hold down the quick trim button and holding it, recenter the stick back to the middle, release the quick trim, and now no trim, no stick force is required to maintain that attitude. Interesting that there's a little bit of right cyclic in there. So let's get this traffic pattern happening, our right-hand circuit. And that requires a tiny bit of left pedal to keep the yaw string on the exterior of the helicopter there, pointing upwards. Now a bit of right, there we go. Now that means we're in good trim as we go around, and a coordinated turn. 4,600 feet. We're already getting to where I said I wanted to go. So that's good. We're going downwind now. Pitching down yet further so that we don't blow through. I don't want to go much higher than 4,800. 4,700 there. Okay, oh, that was a bit too much. Looking at the VSI, the vertical speed now. Try and get all of that balanced about there. Again, holding down the quick trim, recentering the stick. And I'm just going to trim out that little bit of right cyclic that was in there using the hat switch. How are we doing now? Now we're a bit low, so I'll just let that nose come up. There's the runway. Don't really want to hit that hill though, do I? So we might start to get our circuit sort of closed before I fly into that. There's the runway. Good. Lots of things to keep an eye on here. A tiny bit low. Nose up. I can use the trim there as well. Alright, so what I would do now to plan our approach is I would want to be reducing speed. We're at 100 knots now. So, to reduce speed, I'm going to lift the nose and I'm going to reduce the collective until we get to 0 VSI again. 0 vertical speed. So, nose lifting. And then I'm going to retrim it, holding down the quick trim. Back to the center, we are trimmed again. So, let's get the circuit in before I hit that hill. Right hand pedal to get that yaw string back in the right place. We're losing height here, too much. Bring the nose up. How's our circuit going there? There's the runway. Let's get our base leg curtailed so that we're on final approach already. Nice and quick. So, how to get onto that landing zone there about a quarter of the way along the runway. I need to reduce collective. That slider is coming down fast now. So, now nose up so we don't lose too much height. Starting to get our trim out now. Holding down the quick trim. Back to the center. Good. Speed. Still 80. Reducing the collective further. And further still, lifting the nose. Now I want to... Notice how that trim's now almost back in the center. That is good. I could probably safely reset it now. Hitting reset. And so now we can assume that I've got full control. And adding collective now so that we don't smash into the runway. And I was pretty happy with that approach. That was a pretty good approach. Reasonably well managed, I think. We kept our speed up on the approach so that we didn't sag and require an emergency application of collective to keep us going. Now let's see if I can do a nice hover taxi back in. I can hear an AW139 helicopter outside my window. One of the ambulance helicopters in my part of the world. Helicopter spotting even as I'm making videos for you. And now again adjusting that collective so that we've got a nice safe hover taxi here. If the engine cuts out, I'm not going to crash the helicopter because I'm only a few feet above the pavement there. That's good. Bit of a flurry of controls there to try and be a bit more steady. Oh, it's hard work, the hover taxi on the spring, working against the spring, but that's just what it's like with a sprung joystick like this. That's just what it's like. You can look up methods to adjust the springs in your stick, see if your stick offers the adjustability on the springs there. I don't really feel like performing surgery on my old Thrustmaster, so I'll just make do. And hopefully this has been a useful demo for you as I try and set down just in front of the no entry sign there. Going down now on the collective, settling down onto the two skids. And I don't think that was too bad. We have achieved reasonable flight with our cheap joystick. So here is a list of some of the controls that were important today. This is going to be helpful to you if you just need to look up the names, alright? So look at those rotor lateral trim and rotor longitudinal trim. Those ones are important. The rotor trim reset I used today as well. The other one just not quite on this list here, it was quick trim. Now, quick trim is not realistic. Real helicopters don't work like that. It's an adaptation for flight simulation, but it's a really useful one because you saw how I used it in the video, right? Instead of having to use all of that pressure on the stick, it kind of makes a new center point by adjusting the trim out in the direction that the stick just was. So those are really useful things to have set up. And when you do set them up, you can save them on to a new preset config. And as you can see in that shot there, I just called mine Helicopters All. And whether I'm flying the Robinson R66 turbine like I was here, or any of the other helicopters, I can just assign that Helicopters All control scheme to those ones, and I can get the benefit of those same controls right across the board. Thanks so much, and see you on another flight soon.